a number of things. You do have to be careful, definitely, especially if you talk about politics, which sometimes we do. But we'll just deal with it if they end up removing something. We may use Rumble or something in the future if we really get videos removed. I do videos almost every day on Instagram where I'm going through the Bible. And so far, we haven't had any of those removed, except for maybe there was one, I think, that they did remove, and it came back eventually. But that was when we got into a debate with the Secular Society at George Mason University. Oh. And I think one of those students or something maybe reported the video, and then basically they didn't have a case for it, I think, because it's a public property, so we can record if we want. And they ended up bringing it back.
Okay, I'm just concerned that the viewer doesn't get into difficulty.
Oh,
it's a different thing.
Oh, okay. Like they're cracking down on people when they view
I think so.
Okay.
Just be careful.
Yeah, we'll have to watch out for that. But today, I think Raphael is going to come in a little bit. Dave is not going to make it. He has a thing for one more week, and he said he'll make it next week. So this week we're going over art. The aspect, we're still in our Cultural Apologetics series, and we're getting into art and Christianity. And I titled this one, The Desirable Worldview, Christianity, the Ultimate Source of Beauty and Artistic Coherence. And so I take again, we get a little bit into Paul Gould's framework, but most of the time we're talking about Francis Schaeffer this lesson. And what I think is really important that we notice and think about for this lesson is mainly art reflects the culture. And art is a reflection of the culture, and we'll watch a video of Francis Schaeffer here in a minute that gets into this. But the art reflects the culture, and so what we can be thinking about is how we can see what is going on with culture based on the art that we see. And because what we're trying to do with cultural apologetics is understand, what story are people living in today, and how can we kind of enter into that story and show that Christianity is desirable. So showing people that Christianity is desirable and knowing where they're coming from, I think is really important. So thinking about that as we go forward, what kind of art do we see in today's culture? And I'll have a couple of slides on that, and how does it reflect where people's thinking is, where their mindset is. Okay, we'll watch Francis Schaeffer.
All through history, the artists have done two things. They have reflected their culture, sometimes much more accurately than the writers, even the philosophers. And secondly, often they provide the way for the next step that's coming in culture. So sometimes they're a prophet, but always they're exhibiting that which is the culture of that day. The change that came with the Renaissance can clearly be observed in art. Up to that time, Florentine painting had been like Byzantine art, but even less polished, flat, and without depth. And people were not portrayed realistically as real people. Then came Giotto, and with him, radical change. He was commissioned to paint The Last Judgment. And in it, he did a realistic portrait of his patron, Enrico Scrivini, a man who paid for the work. Nature was given its proper place. Proper, because nature is important as God made the world, and proper in the sense that nature is portrayed as it really is.
Okay, that's just a brief clip, but you see that he talks about how culture reflects art, and then also on the other side, sometimes it gives a sort of direction forward. It creates a sort of, it gives a sort of a picture before the philosophy of a culture goes a certain way. And so we can tell a lot about the culture from art. And also, art has a big part of reaching people's whole person. Sometimes where the philosophy remains very academic until the art starts to really reflect philosophic ideas. And so engaging the imagination, why beauty matters. This is from Paul Gould. But the goal is to show that modern apologetics must move beyond just facts and appeal to the whole person, the intellect, the will, and the imagination. We talked about that the last several lessons. The culture is currently disenchanted, is Paul Gould's word. And so traditional apologetics focuses on truth and reason, but we need to try to focus on how we can actually re-enchant. I really don't like that word awaken, but we can re-enchant the culture with life. And so Paul Gould talks about in his book the difference between being a creature, being joyful in the creaturely role, as a creature in God's creation, versus the modern situation, which is very nihilistic. It very much sort of despises, like it sort of feels like trapped in life in a lot of ways and wants to be left alone. So this idea of re-enchanting people with God's creation and the fact that it's good and that there's a good God behind it. The imagination is central. Homo imaginaeus, as just a Latin way of talking about the human imagination, captures imagination. So beauty and the divine megaphone. So beauty, and this is Paul Gould's word, this is actually a C.S. Lewis, something that he said is this beauty is this, it's that way that God shouts in beauty. And then I think Paul Gould is the one who says it's a divine megaphone. It's a transcendental force that lifts the procedure out of the mundane into the enchanted. It makes the gospel compelling. So beauty has this ability to draw you out into God's good creation. And I remember listening to my little brother who played in the band. He played classical music when I was young. And so if you sit in a concert of classical music, you can just feel really enchanted. You feel like there's just it touches on something bigger about life than what we often see. And it's the same thing with a great painting. It lifts people's eyes to there's something beyond this life. And so beauty and art has a real ability to draw people out and to see the goodness and what's beyond the mundane.
And architecture can do that too. The cathedrals in Europe and Aachen, and even in there's a beautiful church of Episcopal on Central Street in Pacific Grove, redwood and stained glass. But some churches, they look like a nightclub.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's one thing I noticed in living in Italy for 3 years was even the sound, the way it sounds when your feet walk on the ground in some of those great chapels, it has a effect. You can hear your footsteps as you walk through, and there's something almost like supernatural just by the way it's designed. And so you get that feeling of this is something transcendent. There's you get it gives you that impression. And I think that's what God has meant for it to do is, beauty is meant to draw us out of ourselves and to point towards, his goodness. And that's also not just in art, but also in nature and things like that too. You can think about as, great waterfalls and a lot of, the Grand Canyon, things like that. It gives you that sense of awe and transcendence. So beauty, and so we're trying to help people recognize that. So the source of beauty is the divine. It's pure, true, timeless, definitional. It defines things. It resides in the infinite personal God himself. Psalm 27:4, the ultimate object of human desire to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord. Reflected beauty. So Paul Gould has these two elements. There's the source of beauty and there's the reflected beauty, right? So there is the source which is God himself. And then reflected beauty is both in nature, architecture, and yeah, it draws us to that source of the beauty, right? Mm-hmm. And so the apologetic task is to try to redirect human longing back to the divine source. So to redirect people to that source of beauty by living lives and by creating art. And it's not just about art either. Like, this lesson is about art, but it also has to do with us in our workplace, us in the public square. And Francis Schaeffer talks about that. I have a really good thing on his Christian manifesto at the end. But it's not just about art, but it's about how we live kind of beautiful lives, basically, where we see our job, we see the city square, we see the state, the country as something that is beautiful, something that is reflective of God. And we represent that in the way that we work, in the way that we do things. We represent kind of that, how it points to God's greater purpose. So this is the aesthetic argument that Paul Gould gives. Why does beauty exist, and why is it non-instrumental? In Christianity, truth, goodness, and beauty cohere because God is the source of all three. So truth, goodness, and beauty, a beautiful thing can help draw you into what is really true, can help you to think more and go in greater depth. It's because of this connectedness, right? This is what Christianity brings to that picture, is the same good God who made the world, who made beauty, also made truth. And so they aren't sort of separate, but they're all together. Actually, beautiful things are more true, and there's a standard of beauty. So human art requires skill and intention. You have to actually pay attention. You have to have a technique and a pattern and aim towards beauty. It doesn't just come out of chaos. But the naturalism struggle about the idea of beauty is the materialist worldview of unguided blind forces struggles to explain, why should the world be beautiful? What is there even anything to beauty at all? Within the naturalist worldview, there isn't really. All right, it's just randomness. This happened to be this way, or this happened to be this way. There is nothing inherently beautiful, nothing that points outside of ourselves in beauty. It just is a random consequence of something. The fact that we notice it is meaningless.
Well, don't the naturalists, like when I listened to the 10 different movie tapes, and like Sartre and Camus and some of these people, they were finding out that their philosophy was kind of a dead end, and they were missing some real important stuff, especially near the end of their lives. So aren't they willing to concede that things like beauty and like classical music can make a difference?
So I think that what for them, a lot of times, the way Camus and others, the reason they went, like William Lane Craig kind of points out, the reason so many of them went the route of depression and sadness is because they didn't really admit that. They tried to live in that naturalist worldview. And they tried to fit in, beauty and classical things, and these things they recognized were beautiful, but it couldn't maintain really being beautiful and pointing to something beyond them within their worldview. So that's also the source of that depression William Lane Craig talks about, and in a way, the suicide rates, in the modern day, which are much higher than any other age, before this age, because there is that picture. We enjoy beauty and art, and they did, Camus did, and others, but then it doesn't fit in. Within naturalism, it becomes sort of absurd, and it doesn't have any worth to it. So I think that was their sort of struggle, that they weren't willing to admit that there was something to it, and then it lost its significance. It became sort of like absurd. It's just a random sort of coincidence.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the naturalist struggle in terms of beauty is naturalists recognize beauty, but it doesn't really have any meaning. Either they dismiss it or they acknowledge it, and then they don't have a worldview that explains it. And so that's where this becomes sort of an argument that can be made, is that beauty is actually more likely on theism than on naturalism, because there's no reason, given naturalism, there's no reason to expect beauty. But within theism, there is reason to expect beauty, because we can have a worldview that says God is beautiful. That, like that Psalm, we mentioned the last slide. Switch it up. The Psalm 27:4, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord. We have a God who is beautiful. And so this beauty that we see in nature, it is pointing to the fact that God loves beauty and that he made the world and he expressed that beauty that he loves and how he has made the world. And so it does point to something transcendent, which is the feeling that we get when we see great art. So this is sort of an argument from beauty. And there are a lot of artists. There are artists who have come to faith because of this kind of argument, because they can't let go of the fact that, this beauty seems to indicate something. It seems to have some purpose and meaning to it. So getting into Francis Schaeffer. So Francis Schaeffer's main premise is underlying worldviews determine the history of philosophy, science, governance, and art. So in other words, philosophy, science, governance, and art all are connected. They aren't separate. And they all are part of the worldview a society takes on. So when you look at the art or you look at the philosophy, you're seeing a reflection of an underlying worldview, what people in that society believe. So it's expressed, the art and the philosophy are both, the art expresses the philosophy gives meaning and words to what the art is expressing. So because they're coming from people who hold that worldview, that cultural worldview. The biblical absolute provides an objective meaning, societal order, and a basis for individual freedom. Autonomous humanism, the gradual abandonment of this absolute where man is the measure of all things. So this is what we're talking about is when you get into naturalism, then instead of art reflecting something that is beautiful in the world, man becomes the measure of it. And so this is also in philosophy, this is called interpretivism, which goes into postmodernism, and we'll talk about woke and things like that word, but it's basically interpretivism, which means I as a person, as a human being, create the meaning. The meaning isn't there. There's no meaning out there. All meaning comes from human beings, thinking human beings that we develop.
So if
meaning.
I call this beautiful, then it's beautiful.
Yeah, and that's the only standard. And when you get down to what comes from naturalism, what logically flows out of naturalism, that's where it leads. Is if I say it's beautiful, then it's beautiful. But there's no objective beauty. There's no objective standard by which beauty can come out.
That's just like the painting we saw in the Carmel by the Sea, that little store, remember? That an ugly, like really easy, really easy to draw, like a 2-year-old kids like draw a ugly little rabbit there, a rabbit face, and then the price is and then frame it nicely, and then the price is 8,800 before tax. So after tax it will be 10,000.
That's right.
And it's just an ugly piece of like a little kids.
Yeah.
Like painting.
Yeah, like our 2-year-old could have drawn it better than that one, but it's worth $8,000.
And we're shocked. And it's a small frame of a picture, a painting. And everything in that store is expensive. And most of the thing you can't guess right the price, because it's really just man is the measure of all things. I say this is art and this is art. I just put the price 8,000, you know.
Yeah, that's right. And so there's no longer a standard. So that is where naturalism goes, is what Francis Schaeffer said. As we go into humanism, into a naturalist sort of worldview where God is absent, then what logically flows from that is that there is no objective standard of beauty in nature or for art that we can create. And so instead, man becomes the measure of all things. It becomes relative. And so the quality goes down and down and down into the absurd. So the end goal, the trajectory goes into fragmentation. It goes from coherence, so hey, there's something beautiful out there, to fragmentation and absurdity, because man can't create their own meaning. Human beings, we can't. And so that is the flow of art actually over time. This is, what Schaeffer is saying. It goes into absurdity because there's nothing left. It's fragmented. It's ugly.
And then you see that throwing of paint on the wall. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the thing. It becomes, what is beautiful to me, instead of what is truly beautiful, drawing paint.
And one guy didn't play the piano and they clapped.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
yeah,
Brother Tim, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, like, based on from what you're telling, what you're talking about naturalism, like, it seems like they make it's more like from what I'm getting at, from what you're getting at, is kind of like Ecclesiastes chapter 1, that without God, it's showing you that without God, that all is vanity.
That's right.
Like, that's what I'm kind of understanding. Is that really the correct way to think of from where you're getting at, or am I not really seeing it correctly?
No, you are. And that's what in Ecclesiastes, that's why the author says under the sun. It's kind of like without God, in life without God, it's absurdity, it's vanity, ends up being no purpose and no meaning. Because once you just live in this world and you sort of take God out and try to find your own meaning, you can't find a meaning because it's utterly wrapped up with the Creator. And that's what we're seeing like play out in real time. And I think God is purposefully allowing it, is that as we want to be more and more isolated from God, we're also more and more isolated from being able to hold on to any objective meaning for our lives. And so society becomes more and more vain and absurd.
And you also mentioned that man has, like you said, and the standards are naturalism is also like where they say that man creates their own standard for beauty, I think. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, that's right. And that'll make more sense as we go through. So what we're going to do in the next several slides is I have just a piece of art that Francis Schaeffer mentions, and you can kind of see the difference as we go through these different ages. So starting in the phase 1 that he talks about is the Middle Ages. So this is like starting, maybe in like 800 AD or so. And so this is what, Peter, you were talking about, these great chapels. This is the Middle Ages, the work of the Middle Ages, where C.S. Lewis has a really good book about it I've been listening to called The Discarded Image. Because C.S. Lewis actually, what he taught was he taught about literature, and especially medieval literature. And so there's this thing called the Great System, the Grand World System. And so in the Middle Ages, they really saw everything as sort of fitting together. They took, the words of the Bible about the sort of ancient Greek and these ancient gods and things being demons or being like lesser beings that were created by God. And so they kind of fit everything together, and everything's not completely right with that picture, right? But they had a very grand view of reality. And so that's what is reflected in their art is, it's very high ceilings, which point to this very transcendent God that's also very hard to reach. So that's part of what was sort of wrong in that thinking, but it's very beautiful. And it gives this transcendent sort of perspective in that Gothic architecture.
And think about how difficult actually for them to make something like this with the tools and technology they have at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It's really like those things, without a computer, those things help. It's completely in the just that artist and architecture person's mind, that they have such a talent and so motivated to make something so beautiful.
Yeah, and C.S. Lewis actually talks about in this book, he talks about how their shields and their swords and their what they took into battle, how it has all these beautiful paintings and really elegant details on it. So it's and you think about nowadays modern warships and things, we don't put art there, we don't make it look beautiful. But at that time, they so much saw beauty as part of life that even when they were making weapons and things like that, they tried to bring in this kind of magnificent sort of art into it. And so that worldview, the Middle Ages sort of worldview, you can see it expressed in their art, is that they have this sort of beautiful system of how they think things work, and the way complexity all comes together into something really sort of magnificent and beautiful. Put all
by the way, Tim, I think they had a big fire in Chartres and it was a huge damage, and they decided in this humanistic country now in France, they would spend all kinds of millions of dollars and years to restore it for some reason. Just now. And I think it's
right. Yeah, and that's sort of at the precipice of what we stand at, I think, is there is a sort of there's an in-between of deconstruction, or whether kind of going back to some of this classic idea and way of seeing beauty. So I think we stand at sort of a precipice there that people are making decisions based on. And so going into the Renaissance, this is Francis Schaeffer kind of mentioned it, where he showed the big kind of people there. But going into the Renaissance, the focus becomes more on people. So you can tell like the focus is not really on people as much in the Middle Ages. It's very much this transcendent picture of the universe and of where God sits, and people are kind of small. In the Renaissance, which was sort of the rediscovery, all this Greek literature, there was man started to be more the center. So this is the great school, the School of Athens painting, where Socrates and Aristotle are walking together there in the middle, and you have all these Greek philosophers, and there's you can kind of look at the details of them if you know a lot about Greek stuff, and you can figure out who different people are because they put those details into this painting. But art started to become more humanistic during that phase. And so people became sort of the centerpiece, but it's still beautiful. People were very beautiful, and they still had this higher meaning that was tied to this, Christian worldview that they were sitting in. But the Renaissance brought back this sort of humanistic man-centered focus into things. And so this is like the age of William Shakespeare. So there were a lot of grand plays that came out of this. And so you had this, Middle Ages worldview that went into all this Greek literature being discovered. And you had things that were, very beautiful, and they fit into this God-centered mindset that people within the Middle Ages held about life. And then you had the Reformation. And so during the Reformation, Schaeffer highlights how a lot of the paintings became more focused on mundane tasks, but it was beautiful. As in, it was not as if it was, this sort of nihilistic focus we have now, but it was on sort of the beauty of the day-to-day tasks, the beauty of, people just working on a farm, or the beauty of the housewife at the home, or these different things. They were seen as very beautiful, the beauty of the mundane. And during the Reformation, art was also, it was more rare, but as it did come out, it was always sort of had this focus on, it was to sort of describe or show off the beauty of day-to-day life. And so that was sort of the worldview. The Protestant work ethic is a word that sort of comes out of that from Calvin and Luther. of this mindset of the day-to-day tasks of people was brought up to be, to sort of the biblical standard of day-to-day life. And so you see this reflected in their art, that at that time people really saw highly these day-to-day tasks because of that, the way the Protestant highlighted the individual person, whereas Catholic teaching before that had made God sort of far away. And so people were seen as a very small part of that picture. But like the sort of Greek pantheon and this full universe system was seen as more of the main thing. But then we go into the Enlightenment. And so in the Enlightenment and also Romanticism following the Enlightenment, there's this more focus on explanation, getting into very fine details about things. And we talked about this and with Descartes, his focus on certainty. And so there's this focus on the details. So paintings become much more detailed. They talk about people mastered drawing people's hands at this time. But it also, there's this disconnectedness from, really like meaning and purpose. And so a lot of this is a good example. The Wanderer Above the Sea Fog, this one's called by Frederick, where, this person is just sort of staring out. And you see, it's really, the details are great. Like the rocks have really intricate details. They wanted to make sure to get nature right. And the person standing there, there's a lot of good details on the person too. But there's no kind of meaning or purpose given to the things he's looking at. It's sort of it's very rational, but it's also sort of subjective, and is lacking a sort of higher meaning or connectedness between the person and the things around him. And this was sort of in the Enlightenment, more details, a lot of, growing in the details, the skill of art, but then the connectedness of people to reality was less and less present. We go into a little bit further. So as we start to see philosophy and science break down, then we get into what's called Impressionism. And so the focus is of objective reality is abandoned. And so this is around like the early 1900s or so. But the paintings became more focused on sort of subjective, sort of messy. It's Impressionism is the word, which is sort of tied to that interpretivism. What impression am I getting, from this? So capturing different ways light hits things, capturing different ways, these sort of objects look from far away.
Sorry, what is the split in the last face? It says 2 stories split.
Oh, so yeah, sorry, yeah, that's good, yeah. So so in this worldview, so in the Enlightenment worldview, that's a good point. I forgot to mention this. The 2 stories split. So this is a big part of Francis Schaeffer's framework is facts and values. And so we talked about this in a couple of different lessons so far. But facts are those things that you can know mathematically or scientifically. Again, because you have to remember at this time, like with Descartes and others, certainty was something people really valued. People thought with like Newton's work and Francis Bacon that you could know, there are certain things that we could know with mathematical certainty. I could say this is 100% certain. I can show a mathematical proof that this is certain. 2 + 2 is 4 every time, and it's not possible to wouldn't be 4. And that's a really key part of this concept is it's not possible that mathematical things can be different than they are. Go ahead, Peter.
He coughed.
Oh. No, I'm okay. I just
Okay.
coughed.
No problem. Mathematical certainty, it's not possible to be different than they are. A lot of times, so things like, for instance, even memory or, people can be wrong, misremember things. They don't reach that mathematical certainty or different, whether, different things. there are different things about moral things. The Voltaire was really big on this, that different cultures have different morals, pointing to to one people that it's absolutely wrong to steal, and another maybe community that people don't really have a problem with taking each other's things. And so there was this, within the Enlightenment, there were facts, there were these sort of mathematical, scientific proofs, and then moral and religious things became values, and as did beauty and things like that. And so they're just values, and a value is something that can be true for you but not for me. And so moral things became true for you and not for me. And that's what we sort of see in this painting too, is this abstract separation of meaning and purpose, which became values. And then the facts, what are the ridges on the rocks? What are the shapes of the mountains? Those are facts. Those are things you can get down with them, with geometry. And you can do a mathematical formula. You can get it very exact. So that's the two stories. The factual story is science and mathematics. The value story is religion and morality to the Enlightenment thinkers, which is where you see this separation start. Then we see more of a breakdown. And so we talked about this. We'll talk about this more in the science lesson, science and technology lesson. But this is the age in like the 1900s or so. You had like the Vienna Circle, what was called the Vienna Circle. You had a guy named Karl Popper, and you had scientists starting, and philosophers of science starting to see that science doesn't deal with certain truth. So because you had Newton's theory about time, Isaac Newton's theory about time, replaced with the theory of relativity from Einstein. And you had quantum theory starting to be discovered, people starting to talk about quantum. And so this really shattered this idea that science, this factual nature of science was due to the fact that it gave certain knowledge. But in fact, it showed that, this sometimes science is wrong too. Even major theories in science can be wrong. And so there was this drift away from objectivity. And so that's this high impressivism that you see there, especially in German scholarship. This really came out first in the German scholarship and then made it to the rest of the world. And then the art started to change. And so this became an age of more romance novels, really the Romanticism is sort of the theory that really started to push into this age, because people were less focused on objective sort of things and starting to, things became more about novels and fiction, and that kind of subjective experience became king, because reality seemed a lot more separated and lacking coherence. And then the age of fragmentation. And so this is more like in the 1950s or so and after. Nihilism, absurdity, chaos were more accepted as fundamental reality. Within philosophy, postmodernism was first developed and really became more and more prominent like in the 60s and 70s. And this is, like Picasso and others. This painting here is a painting by Picasso, and Schaeffer goes into this a lot about Picasso and the other modern artists at that time, that the human person, like man, in these paintings become sort of just this jumbled picture. There's an eye here and a mouth here, and the art sort of reflected this lack of identity. We don't even know what it means to be a human anymore.
What is nihilism?
So nihilism is after Nietzsche, is Nietzsche's his philosophy, and it basically his main work is called Beyond Good and Evil, And his main idea is basically that good and evil and morality and the things that we believe about it, it's all just a fiction. We feel strongly about it, but it's actually a fiction. Until Nietzsche, people didn't really want to say that so much. They still wanted to hold on to good, right and wrong in general as something with meaning and purpose. But basically they didn't know how to explain it. But then Nietzsche and nihilism was famous for coming in and saying, no, actually our worldview, the reality, if we follow our worldview, we're not cowards. He was really big in, being brave and just, going with the conclusions that, were led to. That was a big part of his whole theory. And so he said, if we stop being cowards and, being afraid of the results of our theory, we see that actually morality is not really real. And he felt like you can become a more whole person if you embrace the reality of the fact that, if good and evil are subjective, then they don't really have any meaning. And so actually the good is whatever you want to do. We're not tied down by morality at all. And so nihilism, it was a theory that came out at this time. It's a very popular theory. And it describes a lot of the way people see reality now. As you go to campuses like us at George Mason or here, and sometimes you can talk to people and they'll just fully admit they don't think that there's anything really to morality. It's mainly just a preference. And so even something like the rape of Nanking or like the Holocaust or something, well, it might have been good for them in some way. I had a girl say that at George Mason University. Mm-hmm. So this is where it really becomes fragmented, and so you see that in the art. And then I wrote down, this isn't in Schaeffer's book because it was written in the 80s and early 90s. It was written in the mid to late 80s is when Schaeffer was doing some of his talking. But wokeism and critical theory, this is with James Lindsay. And so kind of pointing to how you can see this has been sort of taken further in the modern day and looking into critical theory and where interpretivism kind of goes. And so it's really a social application of nihilism. Critical theories, for all the critical theories, are political and social expression of postmodern rejection of objective truth and coherence. And so there's a rejection of universals within critical theory. All concepts that are traditionally valued, whether it's truth, justice, beauty, or merit, are reduced to social constructs or ideology. And so in the view of woke or critical theories, these different things that we value, whether it's beauty, whether it's how we see justice, whether it's how we see truth or religion, what is true in theology, it's all basically something designed to control people. And so it's a social construct. It's just something that we as a people have taken on. And so if we want to change who we are as a people, we just need to tear those things down and make new ones. And then we can be a new kind of people. So they're reduced completely to social constructs. So, and this is really key to the modern worldview and the modern view on campuses where critical theory is. It's a major field, it has major journals, it's a major field in the university, and it's taken a life beyond just the university. And so they see truth as not really something out there, but a social construct, just the product of language and our culture today. For all of these things, the way we view beauty, the way we view justice, the way we view truth in general, there is no real way. There's no true way to see those things. There's only within this community of how we see things.
So woke is wake up.
Yeah, it's
So they woke means we already wakened. Well, woke is the past tense.
Yeah,
so it means we already woke up.
And you want to wake up other people too.
Wake up from what? From traditional.
You wake up to the false consciousness, which is that we think all these things, or we think that what we think is true is really true, that we think is justice in society is really justice, that what we say is beauty in society is really beautiful. And woke means to wake up to the fact that it's not really objective beauty. We just think that way. It's not really objective justice. We just think that way. It's not really objective truth. We just think that way. If you're woke, then you have awoken to the reality that those things are all just things we make up anyway, and so we can shape reality.
Okay. Maybe you haven't done research on that, but then who come up with it? Is there a first book or some person first that make this word and then make up this movement, and then do they have like how do I say, their clear goals, like, okay, beauty, moral, all those things we want to all like break it down the traditional way, or it's something like more like doesn't really have a guidelines, just very vague, but then many people agree.
Yeah, so I mean, the author of critical theory is really Karl Marx. And so even within, if you're in critical theory as an academic discipline, Marx is like basically the person who founded it, and then they'll have different people who take off with it. So Marx is really the founder. And then you have feminism. And feminism, feminist thinking and gender studies are two of the big areas that are branched out of critical theories, of where you have, critical theory that Marx said is basically the things about reality are basically put in place by power to control people. And that's, the religion is the opiate of the people to, control people. And we need to break out of it and go to really understand the way things are, or just to break out of it and kind of go back into the standard of, so people can just evolve naturally, is Marx's whole thing. And so
woke is an equals critical theory. They're different thing, right?
No, they're the same.
They're the same. Okay.
And also, he was opposed. He wanted to destroy the Christian family, the nuclear family, and Christianity. And they have this list of 55 things that was in the congressional record in the 50s of all that the Communist Party wanted to do. And I think if you look at it now, they have accomplished in like 70 years a majority of their goals in the United States.
That's right.
It's a tragedy.
Well, yeah, that's right. And so Marx, what his whole thing was, religion is the opiate of the people is one thing that he said. But Marx's whole thing was society is set up now by the upper class, the people in charge. And those people in charge have set up all those things to control people. And people need to evolve naturally. And then you can really reach utopia. And so his whole thing is you need to tear down all these standards. And so just like you said, Peter, that's why that's the goal. There isn't, and then, I mean, to your point, Anne, that there isn't they aren't putting in a new standard. They're saying Marx's whole thing is to tear down what is. And then because we're creatures that basically evolution explains us that we'll all evolve naturally when we throw off the shackles that society has put onto people. And so this is where really feminist thought comes out of this, because the whole idea of feminist thought is okay, it's not the rich, it's the patriarchy. And so throw off the patriarchy, and then we'll be like what we naturally should be. Women will be what they naturally should be. It happens in gender of saying, well, this binary of male female has been imposed truth on us. Let's throw off the shackles of it, and then we'll just go on naturally to evolve to really into this utopia. So there's a lot of ways that critical theory is taken in different directions. But basically, it's the same story every time, and they're called critical theories. And so, critical race theory became a really famous one for a little while. But really, critical theory is much older than that, and it takes a lot of different forms.
Tim, I have a question.
Yep, go ahead, Brother Nanny.
So, I mean, like, I know we were looking at a lot into the arts, like, and how it went from, like, the Protestant Reformation and the Counter-Reformation to throughout the periods of time. So, my question is nowadays, like, I feel like I started seeing that the new, a new form of art is photography. And it seems like when people are doing photography, it seems like as if it's just kind of like as you can see, you can get all the resolution and all the details, but then you don't know what the purpose is of photography. If you get what I mean, like why they're taking these photos, as if like they see that something is beautiful, but then they don't want to acknowledge the creator. It's something like that is what I'm kind of trying to. I mean, like, I don't know, like it seems so weird about photography because it's real, but no one's acknowledging that there is a creator. If you can get my point.
Yeah. So that's also kind of what Peter was mentioning, and it's important we see like a lot of these different ages that we look at are sort of like you see pieces and bits of elements of them within the society today. So I would say that's more like what Peter was saying. Like you have like campus and other people who recognize the beauty of classical music, but because they don't want to admit there's anything to it, so then it leads into this kind of nihilism and depression because because as humans we recognize beauty, so in so people, a lot of people nowadays take on photography, they recognize that nature is beautiful, the universe is beautiful. So people also share pictures of the James Webb, telescope and things like that. So there's this recognition, it's very beautiful. But then because they hold to materialism and naturalism, there's no reason to really believe. There's nothing to it. It doesn't have any grounding to say it's beautiful. So according to their worldview, it's not beautiful. Because beautiful doesn't mean anything, if that makes sense. So if for me and you to share some idea of beauty, like this picture is beautiful, not just to me, but it's objectively beautiful, we can both see the beauty of it, you need something objective, to ground it in. It's pointing to something. It's the fact it's beautiful because look at this, look how amazing this is that God has made this, basically. And so it's they can see the beauty of it, but because their worldview takes them to a certain conclusion, they can't go beyond that. And so it's often very kind of sad. You'll see it's kind of like sometimes like after Christmas, you have this kind of down feeling because you see this beauty and then you feel
it's just a dream.
Yeah, you feel like, oh, it's just a dream. It's you're not really, you haven't entered into that. But then for the naturalist, it's even more because right after you experience that, you think, well, actually, there's nothing to that. There's nothing real to it. It's just I felt it was beautiful for a moment.
They're going to they allowed the covering of the oldest cathedral in England with graffiti for marginalized communities.
So this is from X, and this is also, I guess these are stickers. This is from yesterday, but they're doing it for like a month or something like that. And so but you can see how ugly it is. But that's why this is like what James Lindsay says here. The woke goal is deconstruction. It's to dismantle, critique, and tear down existing societal, things, construction. So you can see that, like, in this is the greatest cathedral in England. This is ugly. It's not nice looking, but it fits our modern standard of beauty because it's representing a marginalized community, according to them. So you just can see this, and I feel like the statue in Times Square of the kind of, there's just this angry Black woman. Why is that beautiful? It's beautiful because it's just
because she's Black.
And it's also like it's a way of attacking, the cultural standard. Like, I'm not going to wear a dress. I'm not going to, like, there's nothing. It's kind of like just like goes against the standard of beauty in terms of what's feminine and that. So it's the whole point is to just deconstruct the standard of beauty. It's to say as woke, we disagree with the standard of beauty in the West, and that is what that art represents.
It's the spirit of rebel too.
Yeah,
you can see like this kind of spirit also controlled nowadays many democratic, because they don't actually really have a plan in many areas. But then they just feel like, okay, I just need to destroy this thing, and then Republicans do, and then we do the opposite.
Right.
Yeah.
By the way, they appointed a new Archbishop of Canterbury, Sarah Mullaney. She's pro-choice and pro-LGBT, and part of the church in Africa is in another organization. They don't consider themselves under Canterbury anymore, and they may have a meeting, like in January for a church split or something. And the king approved this, and this whole nominating committee. Apparently, she's not a good preacher, and she doesn't follow the standards for being an elder in the church, and she wasn't vetted for for Bible values. It's a disaster.
Yeah, but that's the thing I really want to show about, because what we're trying to think about is what is the current culture? What is the story people are living in? And the story people are living in today is this whole idea that everything that's in place, all the standards in place, are all just kind of there to control people. They're all just power structures. And so the what is beautiful today to people is just something that breaks these standards of beauty, that breaks the standards of truth and what is right, that sort of tears down those things. And so you can see that it's very nihilistic. It's very much something that it's sort of like the snake eating itself. It's not going to last, because that has no standard of beauty. It's really pointing to its whole standard of beauty is to try to tear down the things that existed before. That makes sense. So it's similar, with Archbishop of Canterbury. This is the whole idea, is to lift up, these marginalized voices from those communities, and the goal is what? It's just to sort of make this blend of nothingness. It takes away the objectivity of sort of the biblical standard of truth. Preaching that had a standard to be in coherence with the Bible. A standard of the sort of values that someone needed to meet in order to be in that position. You think about Anselm as the Archbishop of Canterbury, and think about this. It's very different. Anselm was searching for how he could be most in line with Scripture and the picture of who God was. But now instead, we want to be the most in line with what deconstructs those things.
Right. But if they're realizing the price that people pay for having no meaning and depression and even suicide, doesn't this make a difference? And I guess some men, even in England, young men are attending church more. They're searching for real truth and real answers, maybe kind of going against this deconstruction now in larger numbers.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's also why we need to be aware of what's happening and to speak into the culture, because that's what I keep saying. It's something that has nothing to it. And so it doesn't really have lasting power, if that makes sense, because it just wipes away the old standard. It doesn't put anything in place. And people, naturally, we have this God-shaped hole in our heart. We have, this desire for beauty, this desire for good things. And so as Christians, us being out there and speaking truth and bringing beauty and having a love for the work that we're in and things like that, for instance, it really makes a big difference. And so I think we'll close with this kind of Christian manifesto with Francis Schaeffer. And then any final comments after that?
Where have the Bible-believing Christians been? We shouldn't be surprised. The liberal theologians have been no help. But where have we been? As we have changed to this other consensus and all the horrors and stupidity at the present moment has come down upon our culture, we must recognize that this country is close to being lost. Not first of all because of a humanist conspiracy. I believe there are those who conspire, but that is not the reason this country is almost lost. This country is almost lost, not because of a humanist conspiracy, but because the Bible-believing Christians in the last 40 years who have said that they know that the final reality is this infinite personal God who is the creator and all the rest. They said they have known it, and they've done nothing about it as the consensus has changed. There's been a vast silence. Christians of this country have simply been silent. Much of the evangelical leadership has not raised a voice. Spirituality, after you're a Christian and have accepted Christ as Savior, means that Christ is the Lord of all your life and not just your religious life. And if you make a dichotomy in these things, you are denying your Lord his proper place. And I don't care how many butterflies you have in your stomach, you are poor spiritually. True spirituality means that the Lord Jesus Christ is the Lord of all of life, and except for the things that are specifically told us in the Bible are sinful, and we set them aside, except for that, all of life is spiritual, and all of life is equally spiritual, and that includes, as our forefathers did, standing for these things of freedom and standing for these things of human life and all these other matters that are so crucial, if indeed this living God does exist as we know that he does exist.
Yeah, so I'll kind of end it there, that part of this, of being a Christian in today's society and having a Christian witness, just like what Francis Schaeffer said, it means us in being part of the whole of life. So this idea of cultural apologetics, of being active in our cities, in our state, in this country, in the universities nearby, which thought in society comes out of the universities. Us being active in those things and in our jobs and those things, and really living out the Christian witness. Like, what does it mean to be a Christian member of a city in America? What does it mean to be a Christian member of a state? And federally, what does it mean to be a Christian citizen of America? What does it mean to be a Christian, in the place where I'm at? What does it mean to be a Christian in my job? We really need to think this through and be a witness. Because one thing that Christians have done, just like Francis Schaeffer mentions, is we've taken a step out of things. There's even talks today about fleeing from the universities. There's a video just the other day on a popular Christian apologist who she was saying, she doesn't want to send her kids to modern universities anymore. In Critical Conversations, the homeschooling group, they also we've known people who have talked about that, who have said, basically, we don't want to send our kids to college anymore because of how bad it's gotten. But then, if we let society, if we let the universities go, if we continue to let, we don't speak truth in the workplace, we don't speak truth in the places where we are, we don't speak truth in the city councils, in the state, in the country, then, evil is not stagnant. It just keeps pushing forward. And so all those areas, we need to be promoting, what the absolute standard for good and justice and those things. And actually people will be attracted to that, is what I've seen in the places where I've gone to work and things, when I have really taken on God's standard. And, you let people know you're a Christian, but even just taking on God's standard about how you do that job and how you do this or that, and sharing your faith when you have the opportunity. Just doing that, like, people will actually be attracted to it. I've had people who were even Satanists. I had a person who was a Satanist who worked for me one time, and even she left the job working for me on, and she said, you know, like, he was a really great guy and like stood up for me. Whenever there were people who were objectively trying to do stuff that was not good, you know, just because she was like a woman, there's, you know, a bad situation that we had to deal with, and I dealt with it in a way that was godly. And she even noticed that. She told a bunch of people afterwards, like, that she really respected that. So if we hold God's standard about what is truth and right and just, in an age where a lot of people are hopeless and nihilistic about it, it really stands out.
Also, I think I read somewhere just recently on this, instead of Christianity being less desirable, which it was a few years ago, they now have active opposition. So they were saying that being winsome when you have active opposition might not work so well. Something like that, Tim.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you have active opposition, I think all the more you have to be wise about it. But you know, Jesus had to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. So I think we go in to places that we have active opposition, and we need to, you know, figure out how we can have a witness in those places. You know, how do we actually win back? Because the thing is, we're in a way, we have the cards dealt to us, or we have the sort of good hand on our side, because we stand with the one who created, you know, objective truth and created the world and those things. And so when we live according to God's standard, actually, we align ourselves with reality. And so whether it's in academia or whether it's in the workplace or these things, no matter what, they end up having to subscribe to real standards. They have to have some real standard, you know, about how people should be treated in the workplace and things like that. So while some of these sort of woke ideas will get put in at the highest level, you know, about entry to an organization or something, a lot of times within the day-to-day workplace, it still works in the way reality works. You know, people still want to be treated like they have dignity, and treating, you know, that's something that never goes away. People still want to know what is the right way to do this job or the right way to do this thing. And so in that way, we still have we still have this place of witness. And then as people get more and more absurd, as the environment becomes more and more absurd, people are looking for whoever has a handle on truth. And so that gives us a place to witness. You know, people can see that in you. If you're open with the fact that you're a Christian, if you're open about the issues a lot of times in a respectful way, then people will see this person actually has some standard they're basing their life on. You know, it makes us that light and salt. So,
what's happening next week, maybe?
Let me see. I'm going to stop recording real quick. So next